Baptist Distinctives and Beliefs, Lesson 4. Today we're going to talk about the autonomy of the local church. So far we've looked at regenerated church membership, and this led us to look at baptism by immersion of believers only. And so this lesson we're going to look at the autonomy of the local church. Now let's understand right from the start that this concept is not strictly limited to Baptist churches alone. It's one of those things that is part of the Baptist distinctives, but there are other denominations and churches that are very similar to where we're at when it comes to the autonomy of the local church. Some other groups believe in this principle, not very many, but some definitely do. But for Baptists, it's one of the cornerstones of Baptist ecclesiology. When a Baptist church loses its autonomy, it ceases being a Baptist church, right? If it's not autonomous, it's not Baptist. So what do we mean when we speak of autonomy? Well, basically the word means self-governing. So we believe that every local Baptist church should be totally self-governing. Each church should have its own constitution, so that's how it's run and organised, and its own statement of faith. That's what they believe. And we believe for a Baptist church to be formed, all that needs to happen is for a group of people to agree on a constitution and a statement of faith and form into a church that is autonomous, self-governing, and a Baptist church can be formed. And this is why there are so many little Baptist churches all over the world, because we don't have to have the authority of a hierarchy to set a Baptist church up. It can be done by any group of people who put together their constitution and their statement of faith and meet together as a church, and they will be called Baptist if they follow the Baptist distinctives. So we believe that every local Baptist church should be independent. Now, this word independent's taken a bit of a hammering these days. Some Baptist churches call themselves independent Baptists, but it's not always the case that they are actually independent in the sense we're talking about. A Baptist church will be autonomous in practice as well as in name. So just because a church calls themselves an independent Baptist church doesn't actually ensure their autonomy. Right, and when we speak about independent, let's hasten to add that this doesn't mean exclusive. Right, there is a difference and we need to be aware of this. There are many independent Baptist churches that are exclusive, and exclusivity is where a church considers they have some sort of right to salvation or some control of people's spiritual lives, or that membership of that church in some way confers or enhances the member's salvation in some way, that they're better than everyone else. Right, and it's a common thing amongst Baptist churches, particularly those who call themselves independent. But what we're talking about is autonomy here. By being independent, we are simply assuring that our autonomy is protected, and so we don't let anybody else take part in the running or the governing of the church. This does not mean that we have nothing to do with other churches, because in practice we have fellowship with other churches of like faith and practice, and we have no problem whatever with that, with youth groups joining together and activities together and pastors helping and advising each other. Autonomy doesn't exclude any of those things, and autonomy is there for the good of the church, not to be used against the church, and we need to understand that. So when we speak about independence, we need to be careful that we're not speaking about exclusivity. So How does being autonomy distinguish us from others? Well, almost all other denominations, not all, but almost all, and all the cults and all the sects are not autonomous in the sense of the local church. Now, this is what we're talking about here. Local churches. Each local church generally is a part of an overall organisation, but not with Baptists. Right? Each local church is governed by the ruling hierarchy of the organisation, but not with Baptist churches. They are autonomous, they have their own constitution and their own statement of faith. So with most groups there's a progression of authority from the top down through the chain of command, and the local congregation is on the bottom. Now we as Baptists believe that this is totally wrong, absolutely the opposite to what the Bible teaches, and is not scriptural. We believe in congregational government, which is exactly the opposite to what most denominations have. Because these denominations have this authority chain of command, they are governed from outside the local church, and so they have very limited autonomy in the local church. But with Baptists, each local church is fully autonomous. If a particular church or pastor steps out of line, they are soon dealt with and pulled back into line. The constitution of the local church is not the final authority in its government, and it must not violate the constitution of the overall body. When it comes to local church statement of faith, there's the same problem. The local church is bound by the particular confession of faith of the organisation, and this denies another principle that Baptists hold dear, and that is what we call individual soul liberty. Now, it needs to be made clear that we as Baptists do not condemn confessions of faith. In fact, we are quite in favour of confessions of faith. Some are obviously better than others. Some have been very carefully put together. The Westminster Confession of Faith, we don't agree with what it says about baptism, but many of the articles of the Confession of Faith, of the Westminster Confession of Faith, we would agree with wholeheartedly. Some are very good and some are not good at all. They are attempts to summarise various beliefs and belief systems, and as such are useful and have a place in the scheme of the overall teaching of Christianity. The problem arises when they become the required statement of faith, and so override individual soul liberty, and they also can be used to override the autonomy of the local church, and we as Baptists avoid that. How then, when it comes to this matter of autonomy, do we view the idea of a union of churches of like faith or an association of churches of like faith? Well, we've got the Baptist Union of New South Wales and the Baptist Union of Victoria and the Baptist Union of Queensland. Right. But we as Baptists are very wary of any form of legal unionism or legal association. Now, we've tried this. The Baptist Union fell into this trap, and it has now destroyed them as far as being Baptist is concerned. It took almost 100 years, not quite, to run its course, but the results are obvious to everyone now. The Baptist Union understood that there was a danger in forming a legal union and legal association, and they built safeguards to the autonomy of the local churches. But these became self-destructive, as it was the very people of the union organisation who finally became a hierarchy and took over the system and made us into a denomination. Through their control of the centralised Bible college, and without the knowledge of the local churches, or without the consent of the local churches, the leaders of the union deliberately changed the text of the Bible taught in the college, and so they destroyed the very basis of the Baptist Union. Now, up until that point, the Baptist Union was going fine. It was growing successfully. It was starting new churches. It was doing a great work. But eventually, because we undermined the autonomy of the local churches and we forgot our Baptist distinctives, we destroyed ourselves. To avoid this, we guard our autonomy carefully, and there's many of us now who understand that autonomy is so important for Baptists. And we guard our autonomy carefully by being equally careful to work with and maintain fellowship with churches of like faith and practice. We do need each other, we just don't need to be legally bound together. And so we need to protect our autonomy. In guarding our autonomy, we automatically rule out any possibility of being part of the ecumenical movement. Baptists cannot be Baptists and be ecumenical in that sense, where we join with other churches and put aside our autonomy. We also believe in church-run and church-controlled Bible colleges. We've tried the idea of a centralised Bible college and it's failed. It destroyed the union itself. If we have church-run and church-controlled Bible colleges, it at least guarantees that someone is accountable for what is taught. Now, it's not a perfect system because we've seen that often even church-run and church-controlled Bible colleges can get right off the track, but at least we can know that there's somebody who's accountable for what's taught. But you ask yourself, isn't there a danger in autonomy? Isn't it possible that because a church, a local church, even a little local church, is totally self-governing, it will just decide that it can do whatever it likes? What if people get into membership who aren't really Baptist? Won't that church get away from the biblical New Testament model of a local church? Well, yes, it will, right? But the beauty of autonomy as we practice it is that each church exists only if the congregation supports it, because we believe in congregational government. So if a church or a pastor does the wrong thing, that church soon ceases to exist and dies away, and eventually it'll be gone and it'll leave room for a new one to start. This is an excellent safeguard against the propagation of error, and it does work. In Australia we see this safeguard working all the time, as Baptist churches are dying all over the country due to the error being taught in many of our Bible colleges, and the churches just die, and then somebody comes along and says, well, there's a gap here, there's a need for a church, and a new church begins and we start again. It is at this point that unions and associations fall down. The Baptist Union has many churches that are no longer really Baptist and would have closed long ago if they were truly autonomous. The union, however, ensures that these churches don't close down, and this is the problem with denominations too. They do the same thing. And so error and compromise are propagated and just continue to grow. Instead of being the church dying and that error dying with it, but it just continues to grow. It has come to the stage where there's a Baptist union that has no Baptist distinctive and so is really no longer Baptist at all. And that's what history has taught us. This principle of autonomy is based on the biblical principle of congregational government, out of which comes our system of vested authority. And we'll look at these the next lesson and we'll see that they all go together. If you take any of them out, you don't have really Baptistic churches, you have churches that are no longer Baptist at all.